In this century, great strides have been made toward the goal of subverting our republic into a democracy. The foremost tactic of the subverters is subversion of language. By calling America a democracy until people thoughtlessly accept and use the term, the totalitarians have obscured the real meaning of our principles of government. That is a summary of my report on a constitutional republic, not a democracy.
Welcome back to Notify America. In 2015, as Donald Trump made his way down the escalator at Trump Tower in New York to announce his candidacy, the media, corporate media, already began to have it out for him. And shortly thereafter is when the onslaught began, picking apart everything that the man would say, whether it be jokes that he would tell, him speaking off the cuff. All of it would be misrepresented, and most of it would be misrepresented. And they began to even run segments on their broadcasts dedicated to fact-checking segments. But what these really were narrative checkers, not fact checkers, narrative checkers, to make sure that the statements were in line with what the establishment narrative was. The Washington Post even created a database to house all of these false or misleading statements. Now, they claim that their database has over 30,000 false statements made by Donald Trump. This is what's known, by the way, in the media business as a hook, something to hook onto in order to present a story, which is what we saw happen. All the other liberal media outlets would cite that number constantly and use it to call Trump a liar, saying Trump's told 30,000 lies during his presidency. You would hear people all the time, media pundits, on different media broadcasts such as CNN, MSNBC, that would just, yell and scream that Trump is a liar. Trump has told so many lies. Check the Washington Post. They claim it's 30,000. You'd hear it all the time, which in itself is a lie, because when you look at the actual false statements, they're a joke. They aren't lies. I mean, they're mostly exaggerations. And it's why when you go to their website, they don't call them lies. They call them false statements or misrepresentations. They don't call them lies, though. But people in the press would refer to them as lies. I've followed politics very closely over the last 10 years or so, and the only outright lie that I can remember Trump being caught telling, a real lie here, not these bogus fact-checker lies, was when he was asked about Stormy Daniels on Air Force One if he knew about the payment that Michael Cohen made to Stormy Daniels, and he lied. He said that he didn't know about it. It turned out that he did. That was a lie. You could tell at the time that he was lying. He did it probably to protect his family, protect his wife. Now, I may be wrong. I probably am. There may be countless other examples, but I don't remember them. Everything else, for the most part, was just exaggeration and the media misrepresenting the man. But the point is, Trump was the breaking point. From the minute he came down that escalator, the media's dishonesty began to shine through and was exposed to the American people. I'm sure they've been doing this sort of thing since time immemorial, but most people didn't realize it until Donald Trump. And it's not only about Trump. The story is not about Trump at all. It's about establishment narratives that have rooted their way into society so deeply that even with a lot of well-intentioned people fighting back, it still seems impossible to break the facade. Well, enter Vivek Ramaswamy, the one man who can do what Donald Trump never could, articulate as well as anyone all the falsehoods, all the propaganda. Look, I think Vivek could be the cure to this misinformation virus, the woke mind virus. The guy is able to talk to these people, the media, at their level in the technical jargon that they would use to tear Trump down. Everything Trump says is very broad, right? Non-specific, which is why the media love him. They can take one Trump soundbite and interpret it in so many different ways, turn it into hours of news. Even though most sensible people understand what he means, the media use it to their advantage. Well, they can't do that with Vivek. There aren't any holes left in his statements. He is precise when he speaks, and it's why they don't like him. Only approved talking points allowed. They don't mind their audiences hearing what Nikki Haley has to say, what Ron DeSantis has to say. Republican establishment talking points are fine, but say things that are actually true, and they lose their minds. Well, yesterday, while Vivek was campaigning in Iowa, he decided to hold the media accountable. He held this impromptu intervention, let's just call it an intervention with reporters, something that's far overdue in my opinion. Watch this.
If this is okay, and I'm just kind of curious on the previous question that you those four things that were provably false.
Yes.
And I'm just kind of curious. I know some of these guys, we've been following some of you guys. I'm curious if there's any national media who actually believe that they were wrong, that those hearings were wrong.
Actually, it's a good question, Eddie. So Eddie's you guys are colleagues, two of the top state reps here. And I think that's a good thing to be curious about. Just by show of hands, who here is willing to admit that the Trump-Russia collusion hoax was indeed incorrectly reported by the mainstream media? Is there anybody here able to admit that was incorrect reporting?
It wouldn't be really appropriate for us to answer a question like that.
Why not? Why would that be inappropriate? I think it would be inappropriate. What's inappropriate is lying to the public.
We're doing our job asking you.
Was the public lied to, or did the media report on the set of facts that were provided?
So that's a fair question. I actually think that the public was lied to long after the media systematically still understood that this was the product of the Steele dossier. The Steele dossier was a piece of Russian disinformation provided by the Hillary Clinton campaign that was served up to the federal government as a basis for issuing a FISA warrant to then potentially infiltrate a member of the opposition party. If this was Bush and Cheney doing it to John Kerry, this would have been the stuff of scandal, impeachment, and worse. And yet, I think it was an intentional lie that the media said that account, which we now know to be true, was actually the Russian disinformation. Now, Shauna, I would be charitable in my interpretation of that if it were just one instance. Let me give an easier one. Just by show of hands, does anybody believe the media's reporting about the origin of COVID-19 ran flatly in face of the facts that you have a Wuhan Institute of Virology that was now the likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic? You all said that it wasn't for a long time. By show of hands, was the Wuhan lab the likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic? Everybody, media or not. So you have reported, the same media that has reported that the COVID-19 pandemic did not originate in a lab in Wuhan is willing to even say, unwilling to admit today.
The report came out in 2023, so I guess
it was known that there was a Wuhan Institute of Virology where they were conducting gain-of-function research, the very city which was the origin of a global pandemic, and yet the media's explanation was that somehow it could have been any source other than actually having started in a lab. I just think that that's systematically unacceptable. The Hunter Biden laptop. Is the Hunter Biden laptop story, as reported by the New York Post, which was shut down, had the Twitter account locked for anybody who is even sharing the story of the Hunter Biden laptop found on the eve of the last election? The media reported that it was Russian disinformation on the eve of that election. Does anyone here agree that the Hunter Biden laptop story, as reported by the New York Post, was indeed accurately reported and was not Russian disinformation, but was in fact a factually owned laptop of Hunter Biden? I mean, you got to, man. I mean, your paper reported it. Does everybody else seriously not believe that?
I mean, I believe that Hunter Biden is suing Rudy Giuliani over the laptop, so I don't think that's...
So you don't believe, so you think that it actually was the product of Russian disinformation, as was reported by the media, that was the basis for suppressing this at the time?
Over the Hunter Biden case,
yeah.
I'm not sure why we're talking about that.
Because it was election interference on the eve of the last election. And I think there's the same kind of election interference happening this time around. And I think it's happening, the early waves of it, with respect to the treatment of my candidacy. And I think that is likely to be a major problem heading into the next year unless we're able to openly and transparently acknowledge the mistakes of the past. Without acknowledging the mistakes of the past, I think we are destined for an even more dangerous future. And I do not want to see a repeat of what happened in the 12 to 15 months leading up to January of 2021. I don't want to see that in this country. And I worry we're on a path to far worse than that until we have accountability 360 degrees for the mistakes that were made in that lead up. And the Hunter Biden laptop story and its suppression, Shauna, I do believe was a key part of the lead up to that. I think the suppression of the origin of COVID and the origin of the pandemic was a key part of the lead up to what happened in January of 2021. I think that the systematic suppression of speech in this country, even about debating the lockdowns, was a key part of what culminated in January 6, 2021. And as somebody who's looking to lead this country and hopefully, dare I say, reunite this country, I think it is critical, it is vital to the future of this country that we not repeat those same mistakes, and yet that's exactly what I'm seeing play out in slow motion, hiding in plain sight. And so it's my concern for this country that leads me to run for U.S. president. It's my concern for this country that causes me to raise what aren't some ancient issues to be swept under the rug. I think that history is relevant to what's happening today.